This mindfulness really is important. It really counts. Likewise, when you have an altar, whether it's at the temple or at home, it should always be clean and free of dust. The bowls should always be clean, no nasty ring around them because you didn't wipe them. You know? The offerings should be made every day. Of course, in opening one's altar, automatically one is making offerings. That has to be done mindfully. And if you don't have a regulation type altar yet, there is a regulation type altar. If you don't have that yet, if you just have an image of the Buddha and offer one flower, a few grains of rice, a cup of water, something like that every day, that mindfulness brings an awakening to the sacred. Once again, it's not for the picture. It's for us. Conversely, not doing that, not having sacred image, not having a way to establish the sacredness of any given day, hour, moment, life, that produces obstacles. Can produce tremendous obstacles. Because once again, we are floundering around, and maybe even willingly so, in a state of non-recognition. So that's very important. When we view one another, if we have taken teachings together or empowerments under the same teacher, we are Vajra brothers and sisters, we are family. When we see each other, we should be willing to lay down our lives for each other. Because there is nothing more precious than someone who is holding empowerment, than someone who is holding the blessings of the Buddha in the world. Now, that doesn't mean you have to make a big display about it. You know, you still have that one vertebra trick you could do. We hold our Vajra family as being most precious. Most precious. We should think very, very carefully how we deal with our Vajra brothers and sisters. If we're ill-tempered, hateful, scornful towards them, if we are not holding them in pure view, holding them as gods and goddesses, as deities and consorts, if we are not looking at them in that way, we are committing a non-virtue. If we speak with hatred or ugliness to a monk or nun, we are committing a heinous non-virtue. I don't think it's written heinous in the book, but I'm telling you it is. It is a serious non-virtue. Because monks and nuns make it possible for the rest of us to practice. They are the providers, the holders of the doctrine that make it possible for us to practice. So if we were to speak with disrespect to a monk or nun, who suffers from that is us. I mean, the monk or nun, they're going to react or not react. That's their business. Whatever they do, that's their practice. You're only responsible for your practice. And whether that's a good monk or a good nun, that's also not your problem. That they are holding the Buddha's teachings invites you to accomplish pure view regarding them. So we shouldn't think of monks and nuns as being equal to us. I think of monks and nuns as being higher. They hold the doctrine, and I hold the view about them. So even though I am required, it's written in the job, it's part of the franchise, to sit higher than the monks and nuns, if I didn't have this job, I would never willingly do it. Never. I would never willingly do it. I know you guys are on chairs and you're going, oh God. But in general, I will tell you that when you have the opportunity to sit lower than a monk or nun, you should try to do so. Always. And if you have the opportunity to receive a cup of tea from a monk or nun, if they were to, in kindness, offer you a cup of tea or a bowl of soup or something like that, receive it properly. This is from a monk or a nun. This is really important to hold the view. These nuns are goddesses. They are Tara, none other. These monks are the appearance of Avalokiteshvara in the world, Chenrezi. Their compassion establishes the lineage in this earth. It's because of their efforts that we are able to keep ourselves together. So again, it's about raising what is extraordinary, raising the Dharma up higher. Now, the monks and nuns, there is a particular hierarchy that we think of when we honor one another. Like, for instance, the younger, I don't mean younger in terms of age, but younger in terms of ordination. The more lately ordained monks and nuns are supposed to hold the elders in higher respect. And you should, because they have held the robes longer, even if you're better at your practice. If there is a monk or a nun that has held their robes longer than you, you hold them up. You practice that view. You monks and nuns that have had your robes for a long time, however, you don't hold yourselves up and practice the view that way. You don't think, well, you know, I'm an older monk. I'm an older nun. You don't do like that. In fact, your job should be a little bit like the tactic I take. Perhaps you can allow younger monks and nuns to show some respect if that is their practice and they are willing to do so. But in your mind, you should be thinking, these are the most precious ones, the babies, the newly ordained, fresh, moist with longing. You know, you should think that they are still fresh from that devotion, from that opening, from that pouring out that happened within them, that allowed them. And not only that, but the gathering of merit that it took them to become monks and nuns. You should think, these are the jewels. I, as an older monk or nun, am responsible for bringing these along because they are so precious, not because they are younger in their ordination. Do you understand that? So, in a way, each of us, if you can kind of get the gist of what I'm saying, we are all looking for ways not to have our own ego in the center of our own mandala. Because that ain't happy. We are looking for a way to practice view in such a way that we really begin to awaken to the sense of all phenomena, all appearances being none other than the celestial palace mandala. We begin to awaken to the sense of, and that doesn't mean faking it, it means practicing like I said. Not just saying, oh, everything is love and light, everything is celestial palace mandala. That's not how it's done. That will produce absolutely zero result. Positive thinking is not the same thing as practicing view. Positive thinking is nice, it's lovely, I hope you do it, but that ain't what the Buddha taught. So practicing view is much firmer than that, and yet more subtle. And that is instituting the habit in your mind to see things differently than you did before. Using every opportunity to get yourself, your ego, off that throne. Using every opportunity to flush out that obsessive compulsive desire syndrome. You know, the one that you have something sweet and then you have to balance it with something salty, and then you have to have something sour, and then you have to have something wet, then you're thirsty, and then you're hungry, and you know, that obsessive thing that is never ending. We're trying to use those are the attributes of your ego. That is what your ego does. That obsessive compulsive nature, that constantly going round in circles with what we want, that is absolutely the nature of the ego. That's all it does. That's all it does. And your five senses help you do it. You smell what you want, you see what you want, you touch what you want, you grab what you want. You know? Five senses help us to do that. So any opportunity that we have to move away from that is an excellent opportunity. And when we have that opportunity and we search them out, and once you get the knack of searching them out, you will find those opportunities everywhere. Everywhere. Because there is no place where it's impossible to practice the sacred. So that being the case, once you move into that posture of really practicing view and beginning to give rise to that recognition and beginning to see all extraordinary, compassionate, sacred objects as being something different, once you begin to see opportunities in every part of your life, you will begin as well to recognize Guru Rinpoche's blessing. Once you recognize those opportunities and practice like that, Guru Rinpoche's blessing will be everywhere. Oftentimes we run into this terrible, terrible, tragic separation in our lives, don't we? Where this is this thing and that's the sacred. You know, this is the life and that's the sacred. And the way that we practice it is we say, okay, well, here's how I'm doing on my path. I got this practice and that practice and this practice, and I've got, 300, I've accumulated 30,000 prostrations or 100,000, whatever it is, and so that's how I'm doing on my path. Then we have our lives. We go, oh, am I making lots of money? Do I have a good family situation? Do I have good relationships, good friends? Do I have a good social life? Am I cool? Mostly, am I cool? Am I in? Am I happening? Am I loved by everybody? Do I get enough approval? Do you all care for me enough? These wonderful thoughts. And they are much, much different. And a lot of times, what we'll do is we'll say, okay, I'll go practice Guru Rinpoche over here. So you visualize Guru Rinpoche in the sky, right? With diamonds. So you're visualizing Guru Rinpoche in the sky, and it's like a cartoon. And you do that for 20 minutes or half an hour, 2 hours, and that's your practice. Then you walk out of that and you forget everything. Forget everything. It's like whoosh, flush. And then in the rest of your life you think, I'm not making enough money. I got to make more money. How am I going to do this? How am I going to pay this bill? And you get all tense and wound up, and you go, I got to run over here. I got to run over there. I got to pay this bill. I got to do that. I got to have this relationship, that relationship. I got to be here. And so you're okay with your practice, and stuff's not going for you too well out here. Why do you think that is? Well, here's why it is. Because Guru Rinpoche is not in your life. Because there is non-recognition. You are just floundering in a state of non-recognition. There can be no blessing if you're not looking for it. There can be no recognition if you do not establish it. No one can shove it down your throat. And it's not going to magically appear in front of you. And even if you do have a vision of some deity or something like that, that's probably because you did well in your practice, and that doesn't mean that you wait for the next time for the deity to show up before you think of the deity again. It's up to us to make one life sacred, all of it. So as we are thinking in terms of, why don't I have enough money? Got to get more money. Got to get a better job. Got to do this, that, and the other thing. Why isn't this happening? Why isn't this happening? Well, the Buddha taught you why this isn't happening. You're not practicing generosity. You're not practicing bodhicitta, or at least in the past, you did not practice generosity and bodhicitta. And so the seed that creates the fruit of prosperity was not there. Your opportunity then is to begin to practice generosity, to begin to practice bodhicitta in your ordinary life. Start small. It's best that way. Start small and work your way big. Because if we start small, we learn. It's kind of like when you're exercising. If you do a great, big, giant, heavy weight workout the first time, you'll never do it again. Because the pain will kill you. I mean, it'll just be so bad. I know, I do it all the time. And you think, I'll never do this again. And then you wait 3 weeks, and by that time, it's all gone. My suggestion is that you start to practice things like mindfulness and generosity in a small way. You have $2, buy somebody a cup of coffee or something with one of them. You have $3, give one of them to somebody that needs it more than you do, or the temple, or put it aside for a donation or something like that. It's starting in that small way to make that kind of generosity and offering part of your life that brings the sacred into your life and also changes the actual conditions of your life. Because really, according to the teachings, if we find that we are poor and then somehow we get a better job and maybe the money situation works out, that cure is not permanent. The poverty will return, either in this life by you losing that job, or in a future life by the conditions simply returning. And we may not understand why. So that mindfulness, that spiritual distinction has to be embedded in our lives. We have to find a way to live in a constant state of recognition. The greatest power that any of us can have is that practice of recognition, to give rise to the bodhicitta in our ordinary lives, to give rise to an awakening state in our ordinary lives, to give rise to compassion, which is the very display of the Buddha's miraculous intention in our lives. This is the way that we change our lives permanently. Or meaningfully, I should say, because even our lives aren't permanent. But this is the way we deeply and meaningfully change our lives, through applying the antidote. Running around like a chicken without a head, trying to make everything work, makes you a chicken without a head. It does not make you successful. It will not help. People, I don't know how better to put this to you, but consciousness creates form. There is no getting around that. There is absolutely no getting around that. There is no other way. It is through the mindfulness of our practice, it is through spiritual discrimination, that we can make an actual change in the flavor, the condition, and the results of our lives. And that's really the only way. Anything else that we do is like putting a Band-Aid on an ulcer. It's just festering underneath there, and pretty soon it's just going to open under the Band-Aid. Do you see what I'm saying? The disease is still there. And I'm using a disgusting analogy because it should be disgusting. But when you practice the antidote, you're talking about healing something from the inside out, from the root cause, which is your mind stream, your consciousness. It's so real, and we've never had the opportunity to see how real it is. How this spiritual mindfulness, this lifting up of what is sacred, this practicing of bodhicitta in every walk of our lives, this looking for the Guru's face in all things. We have not had the opportunity to see what a tremendous life changer this is, what a tremendous empowerment this is, what a tremendous power to live it gives us. And so we're asleep, sleeping peacefully, thinking all we have to do is do the things, the busy work that keeps us afloat. And we don't know why life happens to us the way that it does. And I'm telling you that life is not happening to you. Your life is not happening to you. You are caught in a feedback loop, if you will. Let me use some electronics. Caught in a feedback, a bubble, a reflection. You look outward and you see your own mind. Back and forth. That's kind of a feedback loop. Constant, circular kind of motion. And the qualities of your mind display themselves in the world. And they have the same taste. Same taste. The external conditions that you have and the quality of your mind stream, same taste. Do you want to be powerful? You really want to be powerful like all Americans want to be? You really want to be potent? You really want to be a great being? Well, if you want to do that, then stop seating your ego on the throne. Awaken, get the fact that you are impotent unless you are able to move into a state of recognition. You are impotent if you do not recognize that all the things you call your life are merely symptoms of the condition of your mind stream. You are impotent if you do not realize that every time we have an opportunity to practice discrimination and lifting up the sacred, we have an opportunity to awaken within ourselves. We have an opportunity to practice recognition, and that is power. The way most of us live is like we're trying to get through a dark room. It's pitch black. There's all kinds of stuff in there: furniture, sinks, bathtubs, all the stuff that they have in rooms, We're trying to get from the birth door to the death door. We're going across this room. Now you have two choices. You can either go through this room and stumble over everything that's in your way, or you can turn on the light and recognize what's there. Move around it, move over it, your choice. But that state of recognition requires constant mindfulness. Constant mindfulness of that which is sacred, distinguishing that in the world. I've given this again and again and again, and I will never stop because I love this so much. It's a line from a song that Art Garfunkel had in one of his albums. It goes to show you how old I'm getting. Art Garfunkel had in one of his albums. I think the name of the song is Mary Was an Only Child. And this one line that describes exactly what I'm talking about is perfect. Another way in which the Guru speaks, It goes like this. And if you watch the stars at night and you find them shining equally bright, you might have seen Jesus and not have known what you saw. Who would notice a gem in a 5 and dime store? That 5 and dime store is ordinary perception. To notice the diamond, we have to give rise to recognition and the view. For the most part, that's going to be what our talk is about this entire weekend, different aspects of that. And so I hope that you will come tomorrow and stay with us, and then maybe Sunday morning too, and continue to explore this really, really important and precious subject. I feel that to practice like that is really a natural empowerment, a natural medicine that helps us to give rise to the wisdom that is inherently ours. And so I hope that you will listen up this weekend. Last night we spoke about how to practice mindfulness in the context of guru devotion. To continue that just very briefly and to recapitulate, in practicing mindfulness in guru devotion, one elevates the object of devotion, one elevates that appearance which is in accordance with the Buddha's miraculous intention, with the Buddha's compassionate and intelligent intention, as being different than, more than ordinary phenomena. What we're trying to do here is to overcome the condition of non-recognition, this condition of dullness, the condition that where our mind becomes very flat line, and in a sense, well, in a very strong sense, it actually is filled with so many defilements of non-recognition that the mind becomes disabled, the consciousness becomes unable to discriminate what is extraordinary from what is ordinary. We literally are not able to see that which proceeds or arises from the Buddha nature, are not able to discriminate between that and what is ordinary appearance. So we practice Guru Yoga for the purpose of being able to make that kind of discrimination. When we hold an object of reverence when we hold it up, when we hold it in reference, we should not think that, we should not bring it into the realm of the ordinary. In order to bring it into the realm of the ordinary, you have to think the way you ordinarily do. So in bringing this kind of practice into the realm of the ordinary, what you would basically be doing is saying, okay, now this is me, the student, acting like that in front of the object of reverence, of refuge. This is me acting like that. I put myself in that posture because that's what I'm supposed to do as a good Buddhist. What you're doing there by taking that, the opportunity to discriminate and the opportunity to give rise to a state of recognition or awareness or awakeness. What we're doing there is we're throwing away the opportunity. We're bringing it into the realm of ordinary context. We're saying, this is here and that's there, and we're practicing this sense of division, the sense of duality, while not truly making any kind of distinction. In that particular kind of thinking, you, the ego, you, the self, is still the star on that stage. You are bowing. You are in a posture of being reverent. Don't you look good? And so that kind of attitude is different from what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is a true, honest, delusion-free recognition of that which is extraordinary. So the practice has to go accordingly, and only you can know, only you really can measure the subtleties of your own mind and your own perception and honestly and truly see how this is going. To go through one's career as a Buddhist, to go through the time that we spend as a Buddhist, and to practice in such a way that we only look as if we are holding what is precious up. In a sense, practicing only the posture and the demeanor of reverence, without really having the inner discrimination and mindfulness. This has very little result, almost no result. In fact, maybe can have a negative result. And the reason why that would be is that still in all, this solid self-nature, this ego that we cling to, is the star on the stage. Literally, when you are practicing reverence and doing all the right movements without the inner discrimination, what you're really doing is performing. In performing, we're on stage, and that means that the ego, or the solid idea of self-nature, is really much higher, and we are much more deeply aware of that than the object of refuge. So here is where we have to be careful and mindful. Here is where we have to practice true discrimination. If I were to treat a Dharma book in a certain way, if I were to say, oh, now everybody's watching me because I'm up high, and because of that, when I put my Dharma book over there, I better do it very gracefully. See? Wasn't that nice? Wasn't that exactly what I told you to do last night? Well, it looked like it, but it wasn't. Because in thinking like that, and thinking, oh, I'd better do this just right, I better follow the rules, better be a good girl, put the book right, without any inner recognition that these are the Buddha's teachings, without any inner recognition that what comes from here is not the same as what comes from a dime store novel. That kind of inner recognition, only you can be responsible for that. And in a way, that is the great strength and the great difficulty of practice. The great strength of practice is that you have the jewel in your hand. Use it or not, you have the jewel in your hand. You can determine the depth of your practice. You can practice as deeply as you wish. Excuse me. On the other side of that, Maryland weather, it's really good for my bronchial tubes. It's that dampness, it's just so good for us, isn't it? So where was I? So in practicing in such a way that we should be aware that only we can practice in such a way as to actually bring our level of understanding or our level of wisdom deeper. Only we can practice in such a way as to give rise to recognition, but we have to stop going through the motions. So important to develop really the heart of practice. But because your inner posture can really only be sensed by yourself, and perhaps maybe the intuition of your teacher, maybe some wisdom is there and we can see what's going on, but for the most part, only you know what's going on. And so that's the pitfall also. That's the difficulty, is that most of us were trained that you're wrong when you get caught. And we're trained that way from being children. A lot of times when our parents schooled us and disciplined us, they didn't really relate to the depth of, to some sort of profound level of the development of our consciousness. Very few parents walked up to their children and said, you're not developing good inner qualities. Mostly we were told, you didn't wash the dishes. So it's the visible things that really count, and it's when we get caught that life really takes a downward turn. And that's what we're told. That's what we really understand. It's very hard for us to make that leap from thinking like that, from thinking with this get away with it mentality, or this as long as you hide it, it's okay mentality, into a deeper level of practice where you require of yourself that you do more than look as if. That's a step that only you can take. My personal experience has been that when we take that kind of step and become inwardly responsible for giving rise to a state of recognition, then at that point our path becomes potent, sort of empowered, deeper than we thought possible. But then you could say that about any avenue of life. So long as we're faking it in any avenue of life, so long as we're simply trying to hold the image that we think is appropriate, we are missing a lot. So why wouldn't it apply to Dharma activity also, particularly where the state of recognition or the state of awakening, as opposed to the state of being in this narcotic, samsaric mind state, that's what's really important. How much more so then in Dharma practice is it important to be aware of one's own mind state and to take oneself to task, even to the point where if you find that you're just fulfilling the form and you're just acting as if you have reverence, or acting as if you can have some kind of spiritual discrimination or recognition, only you can say to yourself, whoa, wait a minute, go back and do that again. Go back and do that again. You know, only you can be sitting there doing 7-line prayer, then you realize you don't even remember what you're doing. Things are coming out of your mouth you don't even know. And the mind is all askew, and you don't know where you are, and if you didn't have the beads, you really couldn't count. You're so far gone. So when that happens, do you stop, pull yourself together again, focus, maybe even lose a few of the 7-line prayers on your little bead thing, go back and say, wait a minute, I think I've been gone for about 10. And go on back. Only you can do that. I know it sounds silly, it sounds like much ado about nothing, but that is the power that you have. And don't take it lightly. The potency that we have in our path comes from that kind of mindfulness, that kind of discrimination. Now, this mindfulness and discrimination doesn't only take place in the area of Guru Yoga or in the area of recognizing the 3 precious jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, or in recognizing or being awake to what is extraordinary, what arises from the Buddha nature. There are a number of areas of practice where this spiritual discrimination and focus are absolutely necessary. When we talk about, for instance, the practice of bodhicitta, the practice of compassion, we have to remember some of the basic fundamental thoughts, some of the basic fundamental logical progressions in order to avoid simply going through the motions. Because simply going through the motions of bodhicitta or the practice of compassion, once again, we are being a nice person. And being a nice person, causing you to act a certain way to something else that is outside of you, is only perpetuating delusion. You still have your ego up on a stage, you're still performing, and fundamentally you're not doing anybody any good because you are performing. You're not touching, you're not reaching, you're not connecting, you're performing. There's a difference. So in the practice of bodhicitta, we have to remember a whole lot of things, and it has to become so deeply ingrained in us. We have to work with this mindfulness and work with this recognition so deeply that it becomes habitual tendency, that it becomes part of the foundation of our thought. We understand things in interesting ways. We don't just have words come into our head. We understand things in concepts. So we have the capacity to attach certain kinds of abstract thoughts and concepts to a known thought. And in a sense, when we think of something, we don't really and truly recognize how powerful the mind is, in that it recognizes or sees or is able to pull together so many thoughts at one time in order to understand the one thought that we're having. In other words, there are so many connecting and interconnected conceptual processes in order to make thought as we know it possible. So, for instance, if we're thinking about the practice of bodhicitta, the practice of bodhicitta needs to be understood in certain ways in order to prevent simply acting nice, in order to prevent just looking at somebody and imitating how they act, which may be part of the process but cannot by any means be all of the process. So in practicing bodhicitta in a mindful and discriminating way, one has to understand, first of all, the faults of samsaric existence. One has to understand the basic logic of, if we are practicing bodhicitta, if we are generating compassion, if we are giving rise to the aspiration to be of benefit to beings, if we are beginning to practice on that level, it only makes sense if we understand why and what the connecting factors are. A good example of that is that there are people nowadays who are sort of practicing a kind of popularized generic religion, which is, fairly non-dogmatic, I guess. At least it appears so on the surface, but then ultimately it gets very dogmatic. And in that kind of generalized religious idea, we assume that we are supposed to act in a certain way. I mean, that's the first thing we understand about anything, how it's supposed to look, how we're supposed to act. That is the first way to understand anything. And generally, when there's no path, no foundation for how one practices, that's as far as it goes. To go more deeply, there has to be a deeper understanding. If we are going to adapt the demeanor of compassion, I need to know why. You need to know why. One of the greatest obstacles I've seen is that nowadays it has become fashionable in our generic religious experience, in our new, current popular pop religion. In our pop religion culture, it has become popular to say everything is perfect. The world is perfect. And I have actually had the experience of saying to, I thought, prospective students that, we want to leave here making this world a better place. To me, it defies reason that you wouldn't want to be compassionate, that you wouldn't want to express the bodhicitta. I mean, to me, I sort of even feel like, although I have been corrected, you don't even have to explain why. It should be obvious. But I found out from my teachers, you do have to explain why. And why is that so many people say, basically they're in the idea of seeking happiness. And so they realize, on some level, they must realize that there is suffering because they're trying to cover up that suffering. They're trying to affirm it away. In other words, we're going to just say suffering doesn't exist. We're going to say everything is light and love and suffering doesn't exist, and that's wonderful. And so the world is a great place. So we don't have to practice compassion, see, because everything is already blessed and it's already very holy. And so we don't have to practice compassion because there's, it's just perfect. The world is perfect, don't you see? Can you hear the superficiality in that? What you need to hear next is what's really going on in the world, because if you're in that mind state, you haven't been watching. You haven't seen. There is such an extraordinary amount of suffering in all the realms of cyclic existence. On this world alone, just looking at the human condition, the extraordinary, unconscionable suffering. How can you look at these people marching out of Kosovo and think that's perfect? How can you watch children and innocent civilians being torn up, their bodies simply torn up, with no understanding as to how this could have happened to them? They are modern people like us. How can you look at that and say everything is love and light, everything is perfect? How can you look at someone you've known all your life, who maybe you've known, if you've had the good fortune of knowing one person, throughout the course of your life and watched all the different ages and stages we go through, to watch what it's like to be a child and to go through all the struggles that children go through. It's tough being a child. They don't really understand what's happening to them. They don't really understand why it is that when certain things happen, other things happen. It's tough being a child. That little brain is forming. It doesn't work in its entirety yet. And then watch that person grow up to be a teenager. It's tough being a teenager. It's awful being a teenager. I remember being a teenager. I don't think there are words for that. You have all these feelings and your body's all grown up and your head is still childish. And nothing works. You're just, And then you grow up and you're and suddenly you're supposed to be an adult. You don't feel any different than you did when you were a teenager or a child. You still feel like you don't understand diddly squat. And yet suddenly, because you have a child, maybe, you're supposed to be an adult. And you think, well, I've waited all my life to be an adult. This is great. Now I can vote, I can drink. Yeah, you can also get up early every morning and go to work. You can also work every single day. You can also have very little fun. Do you remember what it's like, when you're just trying to build your life? There's an obsession with that. You just feel like, I've just got to do this. If I don't do this, I'll never be happy. And all that reactive delusion just kind of beats you up. Then, when you kind of get to the point of maturity and you realize, well, not all the things I thought really mattered actually really matter. And there's a little spaciousness. Maybe you have a pause that lets you know that it's okay, that maybe now it's time to relax a little bit about getting all these material things lined up, and maybe now it's time to stop and smell the roses, and then even beyond that, plan for our maturity, our continued maturity. And maybe even you think, I should think about my death even. I should think about how to take care of my children, provide for them and stuff like that. So you get this glorious moment of going, okay, I'm pretty stable now. I got a car, got a house, got some kids. So things are okay. You have about 5 minutes of that before everything you have goes south. And I mean, the body right in front of us, this thing that we put so much energy into, shining it up and growing it up and waiting till it matured, because it has all these different, we're small here and we're chubby there and we're gangly there and we're awkward here. Oh, now we're here for 5 minutes. And now everything you have from the waist up is now from the waist down. And it gets worse as you move along. In fact, as Buddhists, we are required to study these images of a young woman or a young man, middle-aged or mature, and then older, and see that this is the same person. Understanding what that's all about is the key for us to not wander through life with everything happening to us unexpectedly. I mean, that's the most amazing thing about us. We are so interesting. Everyone around us gets old. Everyone we see gets old. We got old people everywhere. But it's always a surprise when it happens to me. It's such a surprise. How can we possibly go through life in any meaningful way when it constantly surprises us? Instead, what we need to do is to really study the conditions truthfully and honestly that we are involved with. So in the practice of bodhicitta, the first thing that we can understand are the faults of cyclic existence.
No.